I want you to look at today's date for a second. It is Sunday, January 25, 2026. Now, usually dates are just markers, but in the world of federal law enforcement, we are officially entering a very specific, very high-stakes window.
It's the end game. We're looking at the period between right now and roughly 2030, where the U.S. Marshals are facing this bizarre deadline.
Bizarre is the right word.
It's not a legal statute of limitations, but, a biological one.
Exactly. We're talking about the most famous cold case in American history, the escape from Alcatraz. If Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers are still alive, they are currently turning 100 years old.
And that's the cutoff. The Marshals have said they'll keep the warrants active until the men turn 100 or their death is proven.
So we are literally watching the clock run out on the chase.
Which makes this the perfect time to open the dossier, Escape from Alcatraz. But what's so interesting about the research you've pulled for this deep dive is that we aren't just looking at the 1962 escape. We're looking at the 1979 Clint Eastwood film that basically codified how the world remembers the event.
The two are impossible to separate now. The film and the reality have just merged.
They really have.
But the source material here is wild. It argues that this movie, which is this cold, quiet procedural, actually saved the real historical site from total destruction.
And that's not even getting into the friction between a director and the star.
Right. And the new forensic evidence that suggests the Hollywood ending might not be fiction after all. I mean, this is what I live for.
It's a fascinating case study in how cinema interacts with history. You got the cold case reality, which is messy and ambiguous, and then you have the cinematic retelling, which, coming out in 1979, really captured a specific moment in the American psyche.
That context is huge. I was reading through the notes on the release window, 1979. This is right on the cusp of a major shift in Hollywood, isn't it?
It's a pivot point. The gritty, new Hollywood of the 70s is starting to fade.
And the blockbuster era of the 80s is just starting to rev up.
Exactly. And you have to think about the mood of the country.
Yeah.
We are post-Watergate, post-Vietnam. The American public is exhausted.
Completely cynical.
Trust in institutions, the government, the military, the penal system is basically at zero.
So into that cynicism walks Frank Morris. He's not giving big patriotic speeches. He's not trying to change the system from within.
No.
He just wants out.
Precisely. The audience didn't want rhetoric anymore. They wanted an anti-hero who acted. Frank Morris, as played by Eastwood, is the ultimate minimalist rebel. He resists a dehumanizing system not with philosophy, but with a spoon and a wall.
The system itself is the villain.
It is. The prison in the film isn't a place of rehabilitation. It's a warehouse for lost souls.
And speaking of tension and villains, the production history here is fascinating. You'd think Clint Eastwood and director Don Siegel would be on a victory lap. They'd done Dirty Harry together, they were a legendary duo.
You think so. But the dossier says this set was absolutely frigid.
A tough shoot.
It was the end of a relationship. You have to look at the power dynamics. Years prior, Siegel was the mentor, teaching Eastwood the craft of directing. But by 1979...
Eastwood isn't just a star anymore.
He's a mogul. He's producing the film through his own company in Malpaso. He's got final cut authority.
The student became the boss.
And the master hated it. Siegel felt sidelined. Eastwood was demanding, controlling, obsessing over efficiency. There was real animosity on that rock.
Wow.
But here's the deep dive insight, that real-life hostility is exactly what makes the movie work.
Because it killed the warmth.
It stripped away the vanity. Eastwood's performance as Morris is icy, detached, calculating. There's no winking at the camera. The tension he felt with Siegel translated into a character who trusts no one.
Yeah.
It's arguably the most pure Eastwood performance because he isn't trying to be charming. He's just trying to survive.
It's so ironic that a broken friendship produced such a disciplined film. But the impact of the production went way beyond the screen. This is the part of the research that really blew my mind. The idea that Hollywood literally saved the physical island of Alcatraz.
It sounds like hyperbole, but it's not. In 1979, Alcatraz had been abandoned by the Bureau of Prisons for over 15 years. It was a wreck.
In complete ruin.
The salt air had corroded the electrical grid. The walkways were collapsing into the bay. The main cell house was structurally unsound. The National Park Service had it, but they didn't have the budget to make it safe for the public.
Enter Paramount and Malpaso with their checkbooks?
They spent anywhere between $500,000 and $3 million on restoration, depending on how you account for it. They had to re-electrify the island just to get the cameras rolling.
Yeah.
They fixed the plumbing, the cells, the galleries.
So when tourists go there today and do the audio tour, they're walking on floors paid for by Clint Eastwood.
Essentially, yes. But there's a complicated layer to this restoration that the notes highlight. To restore the prison to its 1962 condition, the production crew had to erase the history that happened in between.
Oh, you're talking about the Native American occupation.
Exactly. From 1969 to 1971, the Indians of all tribes, activists, occupied the island. It was a massive political statement.
And they left their mark.
They did. Red power slogans, graffiti, political art. It was painted all over the water tower and the prison walls. Historically significant stuff. But for the movie to work, the prison had to look like a pristine, terrifying instrument of the state.
So they just painted over it.
They had to. They used special removable paint, so it wasn't destroyed permanently, but for the duration of the shoot, the island was returned to the Law and Order aesthetic.
That's a heavy irony, isn't it? Hollywood comes in to make a movie about freedom and escaping the system, and to do it, they have to scrub away the evidence of a real-life protest against the system.
It's a perfect example of how films can curate history. We remember the escape because of the movie, but the occupation is often just a footnote for the general public.
Let's pivot to the style of the film itself, because that curated look is very specific. The sources keep bringing up this comparison to Robert Bresson, specifically his film A Man Escaped. It's almost like Escape from Alcatraz isn't an action movie at all, it's a procedural.
It's a procedural in the strictest sense. It is obsessed with the mechanics of doing. If you watch closely, there are huge stretches of the film with zero dialogue.
Right.
We aren't told things, we're shown them.
That's what I love about it. We watch Frank Morris chip the wall. We watch him make the papier-mâché. We watch him weld a dime into a tool. It feels like we're learning the trade alongside him.
That's the Bressonian influence. In a standard Hollywood movie, the hero would turn to his friend and explain the plan so the audience understands. Here, Morris just does it.
Yes, the scene with the ventilation grill, he realizes the salt air has corroded the concrete around the vent. He doesn't say a word.
We just see his hand crumble the dust.
It respects the audience's intelligence. And that silence forces you to pay attention to the sound design, which is absolutely brutal.
Oh, the way the movie handles the proximity of San Francisco is just psychological torture.
It really is.
That's Siegel's brilliance. Alcatraz is only a mile and a half from the city. He constantly frames the shot so you see the twinkling lights of the skyline through the bars and barbed wire.
And you can hear it. You can hear the traffic, the sounds of parties drifting across the water on the wind.
It's the so close yet so far trope weaponized. It makes the isolation feel so much heavier than if they were in the middle of the desert.
And in that gray, concrete, loud world, you have the chrysanthemum. That single splash of color that Doc grows.
The painting scene.
When the warden crushes that flower, that's the moment you know there's no going back.
It's the pivotal symbolic moment. When the warden destroys the flower, he isn't just killing a plant. He's signaling that individuality is not permitted.
That's it.
It justifies the escape morally. They aren't just fleeing punishment. They are fleeing spiritual erasure.
This brings up the inevitable comparison to the other prison giant, the Shawshank Redemption. People always group them together, but reading this analysis, they feel like total opposites.
They're polar opposites.
Shawshank is warm, Alcatraz is freezing cold.
That's a great way to put it. Shawshank is a fable. It's narrated by Morgan Freeman, which immediately wraps you in this warm storytelling blanket. It's about friendship, redemption, the triumph of the human spirit.
And you leave the theater crying happy tears.
Exactly. Whereas Escape from Alcatraz ends and you're just staring at the ocean.
We don't know Frank Morris's backstory. Is he a good guy, a bad guy? The movie doesn't care.
It's about biological survival. It's Darwinian. Shawshank gives you Zihuatanejo, the reunion on the beach. Alcatraz gives you darkness and uncertainty.
Which, honestly, has aged incredibly well because it mirrors the reality of the case.
It does.
Well, let's get into that reality. Segment 3, fact versus fiction. Because for all its procedural realism, the movie definitely takes some Hollywood liberties.
It does. And some of them are significant character shifts. Take the Anglin brothers. In the movie, they're sort of these goofy, competent followers who just do what Morris says.
Right.
But the research shows John and Clarence Anglin were likely the physical engine of the escape.
Because of where they grew up, right. They weren't just bank robbers, they were Florida boys.
They grew up in the swamps. They were expert swimmers. They knew currents. They knew water. In the film, Morris is the brain and they are the muscle. But in reality, the Anglin's comfort with water was probably the only reason the plan was even conceived.
That's a huge detail to change.
It is. Eastwood was 49, playing a 35-year-old Morris, so he brought this gravitas. But the youthful athleticism of the Anglins was downplayed.
Then you have the warden. Patrick McGoohan plays him as this terrifying bureaucrat who is always watching. But the real warden...
Olin G. Blackwell, his nickname was Gypsy. He was known for being a heavy drinker, a smoker, and generally one of the most lenient wardens The Rock ever had.
And the best part, he wasn't even there.
That's the detail that ruins the movie magic, but makes the history funnier. The night of the most famous prison break in history. The warden wasn't pacing his office.
He was on vacation.
At Lake Berryessa,
Yeah.
probably fishing. The dramatic confrontation at the end where he finds the dummy head. Pure fiction.
They needed a villain, so they invented one.
Yeah.
And they needed a tragedy, so they invented the fourth man arc, Charlie Butts.
Right. The character of Charlie Butts is based on Alan West.
Mm.
In the movie, Bucks is this pathetic, nervous figure who just chickens out. It's heartbreaking.
It is.
But the real Alan West didn't stay behind because of fear. He stayed behind because of a construction error.
This is a cement issue, right?
It's a detail the movie simplifies. In reality, West had done the work. He did cut the grill. But to keep the guards from noticing, he used a mixture of cement to hold the grill in place during the days leading up to the break.
And he made it too strong.
He made the mixture too strong, it hardened like rock. So the night of the escape, the others are popping their vents out, and he's physically stuck behind his own wall.
Oh, that's brutal.
He was desperately trying to kick it out, but he couldn't budge it until the others had already left. By the time he got out to the roof, they were gone.
So he wasn't a coward, he was a victim of his own craftsmanship.
Exactly. And actually, West was known to be quite violent and confrontational, nothing like the timid character in the film.
Wow. Okay, speaking of violent, we have to debunk the finger scene. I think everyone who sees the movie remembers Doc chopping off his fingers with a hatchet in the workshop.
It's visceral. But it didn't happen in 1962. Director Don Siegel lifted that story from a gangster named Rufus Percival, who was at Alcatraz in 1937.
1937.
Yes. Percival chopped off his fingers to protest the rule of silence that was in effect back then. Siegel just dragged that event 25 years into the future to establish the stakes.
So plenty of fiction mixed in. But now we arrive at the question that keeps this case open in 2026, the cold case. The FBI closed the file in 1979, coincidentally the same year the movie came out, saying they drowned, but the U.S. Marshals have kept it open. And lately, science seems to be siding with the fugitives.
The narrative for decades was the water's too cold, the currents are too strong. But modern technology has poked some serious holes in that theory. You mentioned the 2014 study in the intro. That was a game changer.
The Dutch team, right. They didn't just guess, they modeled the entire bay.
They used historical tide data to recreate the specific hydraulic conditions of the night of June 11, 1962. Their finding was incredibly specific.
It was.
If the men entered the water between 11:00 p.m. and midnight, the outgoing tide would have interacted with the incoming currents in a way that created a conveyor belt directly toward the Golden Gate Bridge in the Marin Headlands.
So if they timed it perfectly, which, let's be honest, without a watch and in the dark, is just luck.
Pure luck.
They wouldn't have been swept out to sea, they would have been pushed ashore.
Exactly. Before 11:00 p.m., swept out to sea. After midnight, the tide turns against you. But in that 1 hour window, survival was physically plausible.
And then we have the photo, the Brazil photo. I want to believe this one so badly, but we have to look at it critically.
Okay, so this surfaced around 2015. It's a grainy photo allegedly taken in 1975 on a farm in Brazil. It shows two men standing near a large termite mound, and they bear a striking resemblance to John and Clarence Anglin.
And recently, an AI firm called IdenV ran a facial recognition analysis on it. They claimed a 99% match.
Which is a compelling headline. A 99% match on facial structure is hard to ignore.
Yeah.
However, and we have to be the skeptics here, running facial recognition on a blurry, high-contrast photo from the 1970s is prone to error. The angle, the lighting, the grain, it all introduces noise. Is it likely them? The AI says yes. Is definitive proof, not in a court of law.
But it feeds the legend, the idea that two Florida swamp boys made it to South America and lived out their days as farmers. It's almost too perfect.
It gets even more haunting with the letter sent to the San Francisco PD in 2013.
The John Anglin letter.
The writer claimed to be John Anglin. He wrote that they all survived that night, but barely. He claimed Frank Morris died in 2005, and his brother Clarence in 2011. He was the last one left.
And the reason he wrote, he wanted help.
He claimed to have cancer. He offered a deal. If you announce on TV that I will go to jail for no more than a year and get medical attention, I will write back to let you know exactly where I am.
That is such a human moment. After 50 years of hiding, looking for a way to die with some dignity, did the FBI bite?
They analyzed the handwriting, comparing it to the Anglin's prison letters. The result was inconclusive. They couldn't prove it was fake, but they couldn't prove it was real. So the authorities stayed silent. No deal was made.
And if the letter was real, he likely died shortly after.
Which brings us back to today. The Warrens are technically active, but we are chasing ghosts. The 100-year mark is approaching. The biology is doing what the FBI couldn't.
It changes the way you watch the movie, though. The film ends with Eastwood paddling into the darkness. It's ambiguous. But if you look at the Brazil photo, and the letter, and the Dutch tide model, you realize you might not be watching a tragedy. You might be watching the first act of a completely different life.
That's the legacy of the film. It blurred the line so effectively that the myth has overtaken the reality. When you visit Alcatraz today and see those papier-mâché heads in the cells, you aren't just looking at history, you're looking at a movie prop that became history.
And I love the detail that the real prisoners used hair from the barbershop floor for those heads. That is pure heist genius.
It's that ingenuity that makes us root for them. We don't root for them because they were criminals, we root for them because they beat the house. The movie and the legend is proof that the inescapable system was flawed.
I want to leave everyone with one final image from the film. At the very end, the warden finds a chrysanthemum on the shore of Angel Island. In the movie, it's a symbol that Morris survived, a taunt. For years, I thought that was just a Hollywood screenwriter adding a nice touch. But looking at the timeline, looking at the evidence, maybe that flower wasn't a symbol. Maybe it was a prophecy.
Or perhaps the Hollywood ending was actually the documentary ending all along.
Thanks for diving deep with us. Keep your eyes on the news between now and 2030. You never know when a century-old fugitive might decide to finally clear the air.
Until then, question the narrative.
See you next time.